I'm my mother's lawyer. A 9-year-old's words that silenced a courtroom, exposed a billionaire's lie. The moment young Elijah Carter stood and said, "I'm my mother's lawyer," the courtroom froze. Even Judge Monroe, a man of 30 years on the bench, lowered his gavel and peered over his glasses in disbelief. Elijah was just 9, but his presence, his voice, his fire, shattered every expectation. Beside him stood his mother, Angela Carter, a nursing assistant who had raised Elijah alone. Across the courtroom, Charles Remington III, a wealthy real estate tycoon in a designer suit, turned pale. He had filed for full custody of a boy he'd barely acknowledged, hoping, as Elijah would reveal, to access a $1.7 million trust left by his late mother. In a twist no one saw coming, Elijah opened a school notebook filled with evidence. Public records, financial documents, recordings, and even a letter from his grandmother. With the help of a kind librarian, Elijah had uncovered everything: Charles's failed lawsuits, his pending divorce, and, most damningly, his plan to send Elijah to a strict military school just to unlock the inheritance. The courtroom gasped when Elijah played a secret recording of Charles saying, "He's too smart for his own good. I just need custody. Then he's out of the picture." In that moment, the judge didn't just see a child. He saw a truth-teller, a hero. And what began as a custody hearing became the first step in changing how America listens to its children. "You showed up 4 times in my life. Now you want to be my father." How a blank 9-year-old boy exposed the truth in court. The courtroom was packed. Tension buzzed in the air like electricity before a storm. And then, it happened. "I am my mother's lawyer," said Elijah Carter, a skinny 9-year-old in glasses, standing beside his mother Angela. Across the room, Charles Remington III, a real estate mogul worth millions, nearly choked on his coffee. Even Judge Howard Monroe looked up, startled, as the boy opened a worn school notebook and turned the custody hearing into something no one expected. Angela had raised Elijah alone for 9 years, working 60-hour weeks as a nursing assistant. Charles, Elijah's biological father, had appeared in the boy's life exactly 4 times. Each visit came with expensive gifts and empty promises. But when Charles learned of a $7 million trust fund Elijah's late grandmother had left behind, he suddenly decided he wanted full custody. On paper, he claimed it was out of concern. In truth, it was a financial move. But Charles hadn't planned on one thing: Elijah. With unwavering calm, Elijah cited Article 12 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Oppressed Child, asserting his legal right to be heard. Then, with precision that stunned everyone, he laid out his case. He had spent 3 months researching at the local library. He had uncovered lawsuits Charles had lost, proof of his third wife's pending divorce, and, most critically, the terms of the trust fund. The money would only be released early if Charles gained full custody. Then came the bombshell, a secret audio recording. In it, Charles was heard telling a friend, "Once I get custody, the kid's going straight to Riverside Military Academy. Strict place. He'll be out of the picture. I get access to the funds. It's perfect." The courtroom went silent. Angela covered her mouth. Charles's lawyer, Mr. Whitman, turned ghostly pale. Judge Monroe asked where the boy got the evidence. "Public court records, newspaper archives, corporate filings," Elijah answered, "and Miss Rodriguez, the librarian, showed me how to access them. She said truth is always out there. You just have to know where to look." But Elijah wasn't finished. He revealed that his grandmother had written a letter buried in estate records, stating she had set up the fund to protect Elijah from Charles. The letter urged Elijah, if needed, to use the money to defend himself. Elijah closed his notebook and faced the man who wanted to own him like a bank account. "You're not my father. You're a stranger with my DNA," he said. "A real father doesn't try to disappear his son just to get rich." Judge Monroe didn't hesitate. Custody denied. Full investigation ordered. Charles was escorted out by security, soon to face fraud charges. In that courtroom, Elijah didn't just protect his mother. He rewrote the rules. He proved that courage, truth, and love are stronger than power, money, or bloodlines. And America listened. The story went viral. Laws changed. Children across the country began to find their voices. And Elijah Carter, at just 9 years old, became the face of a movement that proved one thing: no child is too small to stand for what's right. A father's lie, a child's truth, and a recording that changed everything. The courtroom had heard dramatic testimonies before, but nothing prepared anyone for what came from the small figure standing beside his mother. Elijah Carter, just 9 years old. He stood tall with a worn-out school notebook in one hand and a calmness in his voice that shook every adult in the room. Facing him across the courtroom was Charles Remington III, a powerful real estate tycoon who had filed for full custody of Elijah, a child he had ignored for nearly a decade. His claim that he wanted to offer the boy better educational opportunities. But Elijah had discovered the truth, and he was ready to reveal it. With every page he turned in his notebook, Elijah unveiled facts that dismantled Charles's carefully crafted image. He revealed 3 major lawsuits that Charles had lost, a bitter divorce in progress, and, most importantly, the existence of a $1.7 million trust fund left by Elijah's late grandmother. The condition? The money would only be released early if Charles gained full custody. Then Elijah delivered the blow that would end the case. "I have a recording," he said calmly, pulling a small digital recorder from his backpack, of Mr. Remington talking about what he really plans to do if he gets custody. Gasps filled the room. Judge Howard Monroe, who had seen his share of custody cases, allowed it. The courtroom went dead silent as Charles's voice played loud and clear. "As soon as I get legal custody, the boy's going straight to Riverside Military Academy. Strict place. Keeps kids out of the way. I get full access to the funds. It's perfect. He'll be out of sight, and I look like a hero." The room froze. Elijah's mother, Angela, buried her face in her hands. Charles's lawyer fumbled with his tie, unable to speak. And Charles, once smug, was now visibly sweating. Elijah wasn't done. "That place," he said, "has a federal investigation ongoing for physical and emotional abuse. 3 suicides in the past 5 years. And that's where he wanted to send me, so he could take my inheritance." Even more devastating was the second half of the recording, where Charles dismissed Elijah entirely. "The kid's too smart for his own good. He asks questions. It's better to keep him quiet until I can fix the money situation." The room erupted in whispers, but Elijah stayed composed. "You don't want custody to love me," he said. "You want control over my life, to control my money." Judge Monroe banged the gavel hard. "Mr. Remington, your request for custody is denied. Furthermore, I am ordering an investigation into the misuse of trust funds." Charles tried to protest, but he was silenced by security. As he was escorted from the Compli courtroom, the weight of what had happened hit everyone. This wasn't just a win for Elijah. It was a reckoning. In that moment, the court and the world saw a child not as someone to be dismissed, but as someone with power, voice, and purpose. Elijah didn't just defend his mother. He defended the right of every child to be heard, to be protected, and to be respected. He proved that intelligence and truth don't need a law degree. They just need courage, clarity, and a reason to speak. And Elijah had all 3. He thought I was doing homework, but I was recording everything. At just 9 years old, Elijah Carter sat in a courtroom, armed not with lawyers or money, but with truth. As his biological father, Charles Remington III, a wealthy real estate mogul, tried to seize full custody, Elijah calmly opened his worn school notebook. What no one expected was that inside that notebook wasn't just homework. It was a case stronger than anything Remington's million-dollar legal team had prepared. For weeks, Elijah had been visiting the public library after school. With the help of Miss Limer Rodriguez, a kind librarian with a background in legal research, he had taught himself how custody laws worked, how to pull public records, and how to recognize patterns of abuse. What he uncovered wasn't just his father's motives. It was a strategy designed to erase him from his own life. Inside the courtroom, Elijah's quiet voice turned thunderous as he revealed a devastating piece of evidence. A secret audio recording made during Charles's last visit to their small apartment. As soon as I get custody, Charles's voice played through the courtroom speaker. He's off to Riverside Military Academy. They know how to deal with kids like him. I get full control of the inheritance. He won't even know it exists. Gasps echoed across the room. His mother, Angela Carter, wept silently. Charles's attorney turned pale. And Charles? He sat, frozen, realizing in horror that he was about to be destroyed, not by another businessman, but by his own son. Elijah pressed on. He had documented the school's history, 3 student suicides, ongoing federal investigations, and a disturbing record of emotional abuse. He wasn't sending me there to educate me, Elijah said, his voice steady. He was sending me there to disappear. But the most powerful moment came when Elijah played the second part of the recording, Charles's voice dripping with arrogance. The boy's too smart for his own good. He notices things, asks too many questions. It's better to keep him away until I've sorted out the finances. That single statement shattered any illusion that Charles's custody claim was about love or concern. It was about control. Control over Elijah's life. And more importantly, control over a $1.7 million trust fund left by Elijah's late grandmother. The terms were clear. Charles could only access the money if he had full legal custody. Judge Howard Monroe slammed down his gavel, visibly disturbed. "Mr. Remington," he said, "this court sees through your intentions. Custody is denied, and I am ordering an immediate investigation into your conduct and possible fraud involving this child's inheritance." Charles was escorted from the courtroom by security, his world unraveling. As Elijah packed his papers and digital recorder back into his backpack, he turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I didn't do this to win. I did this because every child deserves a voice, and someone had to listen." The courtroom fell into complete silence, not out of shock, but out of reverence for a child who had used intelligence, preparation, and courage to expose greed and protect the only parent who truly loved him. And in that silence, Elijah Carter didn't just win a custody case. He made history. "You're not my father. You're a stranger with my DNA." In a courtroom packed with tension and disbelief, a 9-year-old boy named Elijah Carter stood tall, not behind a lawyer, but behind the truth. As Charles Remington III, a multimillionaire businessman, sat across from him with 2 elite attorneys at his side, the boy clutched a notebook filled with handwritten notes, court records, and one devastating secret. Charles had filed for full custody of Elijah, a child he had largely ignored since birth. He claimed he wanted to provide better opportunities for the boy. But what Elijah revealed shattered every word of that argument and exposed a man desperate not for love, but for money. "I know why you're really here," Elijah said calmly. "And so does the court now." With the confidence of someone far beyond his years, Elijah exposed the terms of a $1.7 million trust fund established by his late grandmother. The fund was meant for Elijah's care, but Charles could only access it if he gained full custody. A trust meant to protect had become a target for greed. Then came the moment that would seal the case forever. From his backpack, Elijah retrieved a digital recorder. With the judge's permission, he played a recording made secretly during Charles's last visit to their home. In the audio, Charles's voice was unmistakable. "Once I get custody, the kid's going straight to that military school in Colorado. Tough place. He stays there. I get access to the money. It's perfect." The room froze. Charles's expression drained of all color. His lawyers were stunned. Elijah's mother, Angela, covered her mouth in disbelief. But Elijah wasn't finished. "That school," he said, holding up documents, "has been under federal investigation for years. 3 kids committed suicide there. And he wants to send me there. Not to raise me, but to get rid of me." Then came the second half of the recording. More chilling, more personal. "The boy's too smart, asks too many questions. I'll keep him out of the way. He doesn't need to know about the trust money." Those final words stripped away every lie Charles had tried to build. And Elijah, with quiet composure, looked straight at the man who called himself his father. "You're not my dad. You're a stranger with my DNA. A real father doesn't try to get rid of his son to steal his money." Judge Howard Monroe, visibly moved, slammed the gavel. "Custodi dena, and I am ordering an immediate investigation into attempted trust fraud and the use of manipulative tactics to gain custody." Charles was escorted out of the courtroom, not as a father reclaiming his son, but as a man, exposed for who he truly was. Elijah packed away his notebook, calm and steady. "I didn't do this out of revenge," he told the judge. "I did it because every child deserves a home where they are loved, not used." In that courtroom, Elijah Carter didn't just win a legal case. He stood as proof that the voice of a child, when backed by truth, preparation, and love, can defeat even the most powerful of many lies. And the world would never forget it. "I just wanted to protect my mom. But I ended up changing the law." 3 years had passed since Elijah Carter, at just 9 years old, stood before a courtroom and defended his mother Angela from a custody battle that was never truly about love. What began as a desperate attempt to stay with the only parent who had ever cared for him turned into a national movement, one that changed laws, lives, and the way society listens to children. After exposing his wealthy biological father, Charles Remington III, as a manipulator only seeking custody to access a $1.7 million trust fund, Elijah's story went viral. The secret audio recording, where Charles coldly discussed sending Elijah to a harsh military academy to claim the inheritance, was viewed over 50 million times. Within months, Elijah was invited to speak at conferences, featured in national news segments, and even testified before state legislatures. But none of the fame ever changed Elijah. Instead of basking in attention, he returned to the place where it all began, the public library. With help from Miss Rodriguez, the librarian who had guided him during his legal research, Elijah launched a project called Cool Law Libraries, a nationwide initiative that created legal literacy sections in over 1,200 public libraries. These spaces provided books on children's rights, simple guides to family law, and computer access to public legal records. His best-selling book, Every Child Has a Voice, wasn't written to celebrate his victory. It was written to empower other kids, especially those in difficult home situations, to speak up. Every dollar from the book funded free legal support for low-income families fighting custody battles. On the 3rd anniversary of the courtroom decision, Elijah appeared on America's most watched morning show. Taller now, with newer glasses but the same calm spirit, he sat beside Angela, who had been promoted to nursing supervisor at the hospital thanks to a campaign inspired by their story. "How does it feel to be called the smartest kid in America?" the host asked. Elijah smiled. "I'd rather just be called a kid who didn't give up because I knew the truth mattered, even if no one wanted to hear it." Angela, sitting proudly beside him, added, "His intelligence amazed me, but what moves me most is his heart. He could have used all this to chase attention. Instead, he used it to help families just like ours. Across the country, letters poured in from children who had used Elijah's resources to protect themselves or their loved ones. One letter came from Sofia Martinez, a 10-year-old in Los Guatemala, Angeles, who used the Cool Law Libraries program to help her grandmother avoid an unfair eviction. She wrote, "Thank you, Elijah. You taught me that even kids have a voice. I used mine and saved my family." Backstage, Angela asked her son what it felt like to receive letters like that. Elijah folded Sophia's letter and placed it gently in a wooden box filled with dozens of others. "Remember when you told me that sometimes the scariest things in life turn out to be the most important? I get it now. If Charles hadn't tried to take me away, I never would have found out how powerful one voice can be." That same day, Elijah received a call from Harvard University. They were offering him a full scholarship to a newly launched program in law and social justice, the first of its kind, for students under 16 with demonstrated impact in civil advocacy. His answer was simple: "I accept, but only if I can use what I learned to create a system that protects all children, not just the ones lucky enough to be heard." Elijah Carter didn't just win a case. He redefined what justice means: one truth, one library, and one voice at a time. I didn't do this to destroy him. I did it to protect every child like me. 3 years after Elijah Carter stunned the courtroom with his courage and intellect, his story continues to echo across the country, not as a tale of revenge, but as a blueprint for justice, led by a child's voice. At just 9 years old, Elijah stood alone in court beside his mother, Angela Carter, and dismantled the case of Charles Remington III, the wealthy father who tried to gain custody, not out of love, but to unlock a $1.7 million trust fund. Elijah used nothing but a public library, his sharp mind, and a voice recorded in secret to expose the truth. Charles planned to send Elijah away to a military school just to access the money, erasing him from his life in the process. But Elijah didn't stop after the judge slammed the gavel and denied custody. He turned his personal victory into a national movement. Elijah launched the Every Child Has a Voice Foundation, focused on educating kids about their rights in family courts. Through library partnerships, school visits, and community outreach, he empowered thousands of children to speak up in legal systems that had historically ignored them. He also collaborated with state lawmakers. Inspired by Elijah's case, 17 U.S. states passed new legislation requiring that children's perspectives be formally considered in family court decisions. Judges now receive updated training on how to handle testimony from minors, thanks, in large part, to Elijah's advocacy. Despite the attention, Elijah remained grounded. He still lived with his mother in their modest apartment. Angela had become a symbol herself, representing the strength of single mothers who fight silently behind the scenes. She once said in an interview, "Elijah didn't just save me. He reminded the world that our children are watching, and sometimes they're the ones we need to follow." Meanwhile, the man who tried to use Elijah for personal gain lived a very different reality. Charles Remington, once a respected mogul, was now a forgotten name. After Elijah's courtroom revelation went viral, multiple investigations were opened into his real estate empire. Former partners sued him. He lost his company, his wealth, and even his marriage. After serving 18 months in prison for financial fraud and attempted trust fund manipulation, Charles lived quietly in a small apartment above an electronics store in suburban Chicago. Bitter, aging, and forgotten. What hurt him most wasn't the downfall. It was that Elijah never spoke ill of him in public. Whenever asked about his father, Elijah responded with calm maturity, "I don't hold a grudge. But I've learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's protection. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves your trust." That grace made Elijah not just a hero, but a leader. At age 12, He received a scholarship to Harvard's new Youth Social Justice Initiative. His dream, to become a lawyer not just for himself, but for every child who doesn't yet know they have rights. When asked on national television what message he would give to other kids, Elijah looked into the camera and said, "You're not too small, you're not too young, and your truth matters. Don't wait for someone else to speak up. Be the voice someone else is waiting to hear." Elijah didn't destroy Charles Remington. He did something far more powerful. He built a legacy that ensures no child will be silenced again, not by money, fear, or even their own parents. He tried to erase me. I turned it into a movement that saved thousands. At just 9 years old, Elijah Carter stood in front of a courtroom, facing down not just his estranged biological father, but an entire system that had overlooked him. What began as a desperate plea to stay with his mother, Angela Carter, became a national reckoning, and Elijah's quiet determination would ripple across the country, saving thousands of children from the same injustice he nearly endured. Charles Remington III, a once powerful real estate mogul, had shown up late in Elijah's life, claiming he wanted to give the boy a better future. But Elijah knew the truth. Armed with a tattered notebook, a voice recorder, and research from his local public library, he revealed what no lawyer could. Charles's sudden interest in custody was driven not by love but by greed. At the heart of it was a $1.7 million trust fund, left to Elijah by his late grandmother. The fund's condition was clear. If Charles ever gained full legal custody, he could access the prescience to money early. Otherwise, Elijah would inherit it himself at 18. With his finances collapsing and legal troubles mounting, Charles saw his son as a financial lifeline. But Elijah wasn't the helpless child he expected. In court, Elijah calmly played a secret audio recording of Charles saying, "Once I get custody, the kid's off to military school. I get access to the money, and he's out of the way." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The judge, Howard Monroe, had seen hundreds of cases, but never one where a child presented such meticulous evidence with such moral clarity. Charles was denied custody on the spot. An investigation was ordered, and Elijah became an overnight symbol of courage, intelligence, and hope. But his journey didn't end with a court victory. The video of Elijah's testimony went viral, garnering over 50 million views within weeks. What touched millions wasn't just his intelligence, it was his humility. He didn't seek fame. He didn't speak with bitterness. He spoke with purpose. "I didn't do this out of anger," Elijah said in a follow-up interview. "I did it because no child should be used as a financial opportunity. We deserve love, not leverage." He founded the Every Child Has a Voice initiative, helping other kids learn about their rights in custody cases. With the help of Ms. Rodriguez, the librarian who once guided his early research, Elijah launched the Cool Law Libraries Project, which now offers friendly legal resources in over 1,200 public libraries across the U.S. He also authored the best-selling book Every Child Has a Voice, which became a cornerstone of child advocacy in schools and family courts. All proceeds went into a fund providing free legal assistance to low-income families facing custody battles. But perhaps Elijah's proudest moment came not from a courtroom or television appearance, but from a letter. It was from Sofia Martinez, a 10-year-old girl in Los Angeles, who used the Cool Law Library in her community to help her grandmother fight off an illegal eviction. Her letter ended with, "Thank you, Elijah. I used my voice, and I saved my family." That letter was one of hundreds Elijah kept in a wooden box in his bedroom. He read them, often, reminding himself why he kept going. When Harvard University invited him to join their newly created Youth Law and Social Justice program, Elijah accepted, with a promise. "I want to reform the legal system so that it protects all children, not just the ones lucky enough to fight for themselves." Meanwhile, Charles Remington lived alone in a modest apartment, a former titan reduced by his own deceit. He'd served 18 months in prison for attempted trust fraud and financial crimes. Yet what haunted him most wasn't the sentence. It was Elijah's grace. Despite everything, Elijah never spoke cruelly about him in public. When asked, he simply said, "I hope he finds peace. But I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone the chance to hurt you again." Elijah Carter didn't just survive the system. He reshaped it. With a library card, a recorder, and the truth, he became the voice of a generation that refuses to be silenced. And he proved to the world that you don't need age, wealth, or power to create justice, just courage, and a cause worth fighting for. He was just a boy with a library card until he changed a nation. At the age of 12, Elijah Carter received a full scholarship to Harvard University, to the Ravensspade Diplômes Vermilion world. He was already a legend, a child who, at 9 years old, stood in court and defended his mother with nothing but a notebook, a voice recorder, and a heart full of truth. But Elijah never let the headlines define him. What mattered most to him wasn't what he had done, but what still needed to be done. He could have taken his scholarship as a personal triumph. Instead, he treated it as a mission. While other students adjusted to college life, Elijah buried himself in civil law, child welfare, advocacy, and constitutional policy. At 16, he became the youngest licensed attorney in the Port-au-Prince, U.S. history. But he didn't stop there. Elijah's first case wasn't for a client. It was for every child in America. He filed a federal lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Education, not for money, not for fame, but for justice. His claim? That public schools across the nation had failed generations of children by not teaching them their basic legal and human rights. "If I had never gone to the library," Elijah said in court, "I wouldn't have known I had a voice. How many other kids are silenced, not by force, but by ignorance?" The courtroom was stunned. The nation held its breath. After months of hearings, Elijah won. The court ruled in favor of mandatory children's rights, education in all U.S. public schools, starting from 5th grade. Curriculum reforms swept across all 50 states. Children learned about due process, the right to safety, consent, freedom of speech, and how to navigate legal systems designed to protect them, but which had long ignored them. Elijah's victory wasn't just historic, it was transformative. He went on to launch the Carter Foundation for Legal Literacy, building educational programs in underserved schools and libraries. With the help of volunteer lawyers, teachers, and librarians, including Miss Rodriguez, the very librarian who once helped him when he was just a scared boy. Elijah created interactive learning centers in over 2,000 public schools and community spaces nationwide. Thousands of children who once felt invisible suddenly felt powerful. They began organizing, asking questions, protecting each other. They learned to speak up not just in courtrooms, but in classrooms, hospitals, foster care systems, and neighborhoods. Elijah had ignited a fire, a movement. But for Elijah, the most powerful part was never the praise. It was the letters. Handwritten notes from children across the country filled his apartment. Some told him how they stood up to abusive relatives. Others shared how they used what they learned to protect younger siblings, report unsafe conditions, or help parents in legal trouble. Elijah kept each Planck's Willowable letter in a wooden box, just like the one his mother once gave him to keep his earliest notes. One letter, from a 13-year-old named Leah Washington, read, "I didn't know I had rights until I read your book. Now, I help other kids in my group home understand theirs. You changed my life." Elijah placed that letter on his desk right next to a framed photo of himself and his mother, Angela Carter, from the day he was sworn in as an attorney. She was the reason he had fought. Her love was the soil where his courage had grown. When asked in a televised interview what motivated him most, Elijah responded simply, "I remember what it felt like to be small, scared, and unheard. I don't ever want another child to feel that way again." Today, Elijah Carter is more than a lawyer. He's a reformer, a teacher, a guardian of childhood, dignity. He proved that justice isn't a privilege, it's a right. And that right must be taught, protected, and passed on. His story is taught in law schools, played in classrooms, and honored in government halls. But Elijah doesn't care about statues or speeches. His greatest pride isn't his Harvard diploma or courtroom victories. It's the thousands of children who now know what he once had to fight to learn, that their voice matters, that their rights are real, and that they are never too young to fight for what's right. Elijah Carter didn't just change the law. He changed what childhood means in America, from courtroom to classroom. How one boy's courage sparked a movement. Elijah Carter was just 9 years old when he walked into a courtroom and changed the course of his life and the lives of thousands of others. Armed only with a school notebook, a recording device, and the truth, he stood up to his wealthy, manipulative father and exposed a plan to use him for financial gain. But Elijah's courage didn't end when the judge slammed the gavel. 3 years later, Elijah had become the face of a movement. He founded Every Child Has a Voice, created legal literacy corners in over 1,200 libraries, and inspired policy change in 17 states. Children across the country, like 10-year-old Sophia Martinez, used his tools to protect their families. Elijah's voice had become a beacon for those who had once felt powerless. At 12, Elijah received a full scholarship to Harvard. At 16, he became the youngest lawyer in the country and successfully sued the U.S. education system for failing to teach children's rights. His story isn't just one of victory, it's one of transformation, legacy, and purpose. No one is too small to make a difference. Sometimes, the most powerful voices come from those the world overlooks. Courage isn't about age, it's about truth, love, and knowing you are worth fighting for. If Elijah's story touched your heart, leave us a comment. What would you fight for if the world finally listened to your voice? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Because somewhere out there, a child needs to know their voice matters.